Welcome to Indie Music TV and our first run show of IndiGEAR, a show dedicated to musical instruments and technology. On today's show, we have our distinguished guest, Mario DeCutis. Welcome, Mario.
Thank you.
Mario is the president of Alternate Mode. He's also the orchestral percussionist for Radio City Music Hall since 1979. He now teaches electronic percussion at the New England Conservatory of Music. Mario, there was Alternate Mode, there was KAT. You guys back in the 80s, late 80s, it was KAT. I see it right on your shirt there. You guys sold electronic drum sets of sorts to the musical industry and the Sam Ashers, the guitar centers of the world. Am I correct?
Yes, back in 1984, Bill Katowski started the company KAT. And he was building a mallet controller. And I heard about it in a Modern Drummer magazine. I saw that, and I called up the editor, and he gave me his phone number. Back then, it was easy. It was different.
Yeah.
Went to his house. We became friends. I was one of the first musicians that he spoke to that took control voltage in college. So I was really enjoying the technology. And he had an analog synthesizer that he was building, but the DX7 from Yamaha came out. And when we heard that FM synthesis, it changed everything. So we decided then to make a MIDI controller and abandoned his original project, and I became partners with him, with KAT Inc., about 1984-85.
Great.
And KAT Inc. was KAT Inc. until 1995. And then it was changed over to Alternate Mode. Bill went on, and I've been running it since.
That's wonderful. That's a good story. It was pretty successful back then in the day, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was great. I mean, it was the first of its kind doing all these things. And the business was very different then. It was more entrepreneurial and fun, and people were experimenting.
Well, let's go on to the topics of the show and really dig into it, all right? One of the things that you talk about, that we talked about in pre-production, was then the paradigm shift among young people making music. What does that really mean?
Things are a lot different now. Kids today are really busy. Their time is really split among the video games they play and the sports that the parents put on them. They're very busy kids. And learning to become masterful at your instrument takes a lot of time. So that doesn't have to be the split, either you are or you're not. Music is for everybody, and it enriches the spirit to learn how to play music. So the challenges today are, how do we get kids interested? So the business has seen this and has changed. Now kids use loops to generate their music, and they learn to remix other people's music. And it's all interesting and fun, but they're not creating music. So it was time to think of something else.
That's interesting. So that means you really bring a new approach to the table, aren't you?
There's a new approach.
What would that be?
Okay, when we were working together in the 80s, and the jamKAT had come out, the jamKAT really offered new concepts. And the concepts were, when you strike a pad, it doesn't have to have the same sound. You can have alternate notes on one pad. You can use your velocity to change the sound, or you can have chords on a pad, or you can link pads together. Essentially, you can do what we call textual drumming, the ability for the percussionist, drummer, to use melody, chords, and rhythm all simultaneously. Great idea, but it had a problem, a fatal problem. We were asking drummers and percussionists to program, which means that they had, not only did they have to have a knowledge of notes and chords and scales, but they also had to have MIDI completely down under their belt. because they needed to know how to change the sounds on different pads, which required channel changes and program changes. Very difficult. So today, there has been a new dawn, a thought, and that is, how can we automate that process, but still let kids learn to play by pattern recognition? We're calling this idea improvisation through pattern recognition.
What does that really mean?
Okay.
How do you get to that?
Okay. So if you have different sounds on the pad, and you play a pattern on a pad, and we'll demonstrate this when we get to the instruments, but when you play a pad, it's going to create a musical sound. And the beautiful thing about all this is that when any person sits and plays in front of an instrument that has this textual drumming stuff underneath it, they start playing patterns that they hear that they like. And they start building their vocabulary, how they want to express themselves by recognizing patterns, creating certain musical patterns, and building that way. Building up a song through the patterns that they learn by using their ears. So it's interesting because, one, it helps the mind to remember patterns. And it also builds a musical environment for them, because now a drummer is experiencing hearing melodies and chords. And this is the basic concept of that.
I see. Maybe go a little deeper into that. I know you're going to show this to us later, but maybe go through the steps a little bit with actually programming. If it's that easy, as you say, be the musician or non-musician, if he's got any type of rhythm even, 1, 2, 3, 4, he can play this instrument. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
And if he does 1, 2, 3, 4, couldn't then he might put a 5 over that and just count the next one?
That's the most
4,
amazing
5.
thing. Once you put the creativity onto the instrument and start exploring what you know, playing odd time patterns, playing patterns against each other. And drummers do that all the time. I'm going to play 3 against 2. And they hear a bass on one side playing the 2 and a piano playing a 3 on the other side. They get all excited because they sound like a band.
And they not necessarily really need to know how to do that. You have these, I guess, if I can remember correctly, you have patterns going behind it.
If you want to.
If you want to.
And
musical patterns, wouldn't that be correct?
Musical patterns, and also what young people are really used to now is loop manipulation.
Okay.
So, yes, a person can just throw a loop on and play it and say, that's my song. But if they can manipulate that loop as part of how they integrate it with the other sounds, now it becomes their own personal song and their experience. Now, there's 2 sides to this. There's just the fun side, the teaser side, where you just sit in front of an instrument that someone else created these things, and you learn to play all the different variations. But then there's this wonderful compositional side for the academia, for school, to learn first the chords and the melodies, and how do you create a congruency in this world. I call them textual landscapes, into these worlds. Like a video game, when you hear these sounds, there was a musician behind that, creating those little motifs, the little sounds, the little burps.
So really you're saying the concert musician or the educated musician can also use this.
Yes, this is a life.
Or if it's his little brother that loves the music but he can't play a note, he can now interact with his older brother, and with the gear that you purchase, that they could actually work together. And what I would think, Mario, that would build interest in that younger child to maybe even move towards learning, how did my brother do that?
That's the whole idea, really. I mean, I think the music industry is being challenged in very unique ways. You know, when we were young, garage band meant that you had a band and you played in the garage.
Of course.
A garage band now is a whole different concept.
Yeah.
When we were young, there were bands playing everywhere. Now it's DJs. So it's changing drastically. It's harder to be a musician. So, but if you have the calling for music, you have to play music. But there's different levels, and I think this technology allows to address the different levels of musicianship to what they need or want to get out of playing music.
That's interesting. How's academia? Because you're in academia, my God, you're in the New England Conservatory. So what are the other teachers, the other professors, what do they feel about this? Now, we're now going, the kid doesn't have to learn music.
Right.
What do they say about that?
Well, when you come to an electronic percussion class, there's an assumption that you already know how to read music, that you already know how to do those things. You're in college to learn music. But what's new to them now is that they have to put the vocabulary of MIDI. What does a note mean? It's a note number. What is one sound different from another sound? By the channels and the programs that you send to it. How do you manipulate the software? How do you manipulate sequencing? So it becomes a whole technological experience. And what I feel is that it is so important now for schools to teach this in the colleges because technology is here to stay. It's here to stay. And the computer, it gets stronger and more powerful by the day, capable of doing such amazing things. It's like a product disruptor.
You say disruptor, and that's interesting that you brought up this word. This, in my opinion, is a disruptor for a lot of reasons. However, it's in our game. It's here. It's here to stay. It's here. Move on. How do we pull these kids away from the phone, knowing they know how to use the phone and they use it really well?
Right.
My sense is use the disruption to your advantage.
That's the key. So, your iPad, your phone, your laptop becomes the musical instrument. And they already know how to manipulate their computers better than we can as adults. But there's still this tactile thing that when you're a musician, you're playing with your hands, you're playing with your fingers, you're playing. And there's a correlation between that kinetic energy that you put onto an instrument and what you hear coming out. So the way I look at it is, let's build a new vocabulary for drummers and percussionists specifically. It could be keyboard, of course. But I'm a percussionist, and that's what I target. Let's let them increase their vocabulary by learning new gestures. For example, years ago, when I was back in the early 80s, when I was playing with the very first version of the mallet controller, it was a very simple device where you struck the thing, it made a sound. And I took home the sax player from the job. And he said to me that day, "Hey man, Mario, I feel sorry for you." "Why do you feel sorry for me?" "Your instrument kind of sucks." What do you mean it kind of sucks?" "When I play, I can add vibrato. I can add pitch bend. I can control how long and short a note is. I can change the timbre." And that was like a stick hitting me on the head. So since that day, I became obsessed with finding ways of building the vocabulary through gestures and the technology so that a drummer can, percussionist can experience what it's like to bend a note. You know, if you just sit down and listen to something that, like a guitar solo or a violin solo that got to you, and just looked at it mathematically, it's those bending of the notes in the right time that translates how he felt emotionally to make that gesture. Why not have that so that those gestures can be with us on any instrument? And that's why this phone and that computer and that iPad really are exciting, because you can take it with you.
Makes a lot of sense. Let's switch gears a bit, okay? Alternate modes goals. What are they?
Well, my goals is to keep music alive. My goals are to teach these gestures so that they excite people to want to continue to play. You know, when companies create their company, they often do that for the sole purpose of making money. When you're an instrument builder, your focus, your primary mission is to make the best instrument that you can. And I remember back in the days when MIDI first started coming out in the 80s, doing the trade shows, there was lots of little companies all throughout the United States, you know, like the Oppenheimers. These guys were great making products from their heart. Don Buchler, you know, you just didn't know. They weren't thinking about how many they were going to sell. Right. They were thinking about, look at this instrument that I created. What has happened over these years is the economics of scale. More and more companies, they have to go to China to make massive mounts. They have to try to save pennies, and everyone's racing to the bottom to get the thing to be the cheapest at the expense of the expressiveness of the instrument. So you have to think small to stay alive and be happy there, which I am very happy there, because the goal is not to make a fortune, but to make great instruments and hope that enough people will buy it that I can keep on making more instruments.
Well, that's interesting because, as you know, years ago, I forgot how many years, we're not going to let them know that, I met you. I met you in Manny's, right?
At Manny's.
48th
Street.
48. We built a computer department, and you know I met you there, and it's
80,
been a
85.
Okay, guys, 85. So I was fortunate enough to see this grow. I worked with you for some years, right? We moved on, stayed friends, all kinds. They just kept, you know, I kept playing the instrument, you know, since I'm a drummer and love technology.
You showed me your TrapCAT last night.
I showed you my TrapCAT last night, exactly. So, all in all, there was one thing that we always were concerned about, was the bottom line. Remember the 80-20 rule? Remember that?
Yes.
So what really separates you from the pack?
It's the 80-20 rule. When you're building an instrument, are you targeting the mass market so that your product can end up in a big box store? Will it be very successful in the big music chain stores? Or are you concerned about building a product that represents the best that you can and discovering ways to use the technology that's available now to make the best music that you can? And these are really exciting times because the computer is really powerful now. Yeah. And I remember when I was doing clinics in the 90s, I used to have to take this big, gigantic rack of gear, and if I got a gig to do a concert at a college, it cost so much to air ship that thing that I made nothing. Now I take my laptop. Now my 4-octave malletKAT can fold, and I can put in a little case. I can play anywhere in the world. So these things make music, the ability to make music, so much better.
So that brings us to where we can get this. How do we get this great technology? Please.
Well, we've been in Massachusetts since the 90s, and you can buy from us direct. We're online, alternatemode.com. You can find our phone number easily. You can speak to me. And the fun part is that there's a community, a family. I know just about everybody who bought the instrument.
Oh, that's great.
Because they end up calling me for tech help.
That's great. Mario, just in a moment, we're going to go to our playing stage.
The fun part.
The fun part of this.
Yep.
Yes. And we're going to show our guest basically what we've been talking about for the last 20 minutes.
Yes, and I'd like to also add that we may throw some clips in later in post-production because I wanted to have Will Calhoun here with us, and so I'll put some clips. And
Okay.
I wanted to show, we took an acoustic instrument like a cajon and we turned it into a hybrid, and these are the things that make this fun. So we'll throw them into these clips as well.
That's great. That's great. That said, let's move over to our main stage and see the master at work.
Great, thanks.
No problem, Mario. Thank you.
I'm going to begin by playing a flute sound. It's actually, the Catalyzer software is going to record the flute solo. I'm going to play the flute on the right side of the instrument, but I want you to notice my left hand and what happens on the left side of the instrument. Here I'm able to add vibrato and pitch bend and change the volume and add little riffs and little flutters in the flute sound. And when I get done playing that, I'm going to switch, have the flute sound come back, and then I'm going to play a tabla sound. And notice in the tabla sound that on the right side of the instrument are little motifs, these little riffs, and I incorporate them into my playing so that it sounds like it's all one piece. And these are some of the ideas that we were talking about, again, at that interview. In the video, we spoke about this concept of alternate mode. And that means that when you play the pad, it alternates to different sounds. So for example, when I play on this pad, watch what happens every time I hit it. And if I keep on playing it, you hear the pattern over and over again. Where it gets interesting is that when you have the whole instrument full of these alternate patterns, the mind has to start thinking holographically. What's the next note coming up? Like if I do this again, you know that. But now I'm going to play this across the whole instrument. But I'm going to make it more interesting by using different sounds. For example, watch this. The instrument now has sustain, which is also another thing that you can't do on a regular hand drum. If I want to add timpani, so taking the alternate mode idea into the next dimension, you start putting different instruments on every pad. So for example, on the top, I have these vibe sounds. Here I have some drum sounds. Here I have a bass. What's very important in a modern instrument is have the instrument very sensitive to your response. So we created the instrument so that it's designed for finger playing. And this is an example of having velocity, how hard you play on a pad to change the sound. So just on one pad. Another important gesture is that when people play hand drums, by putting pressure on the drum and then hitting it, you get different sounds. So this is how we simulate this on the jamKAT. And you notice the pressure changes the pitch bend. So this gives the ability to have lots of different sounds on these pads. Another exciting thing to do with your hands is to have pads that transpose the melody that you're playing. So for example, so that's the alternate note pattern, but now watch this finger. So here's an example of using those alternate patterns and transpositions. So I'm going to play a string thing. Now notice you can also have silence on a pad when you're playing the pattern.
Thank you, Mr. Mario DeCutis from Alternate Mode. Again, IndiGEAR is the first run of the series. We'll have other guests on, other manufacturers, other players. We invite you to come back and see us next time. From Indie Music TV and IndiGEAR, thank you and take care of yourself.